20 years ago, a reality TV series about a struggling promotion aired on Spike TV that, for better or worse, would go on to change the landscape of sports and pop culture. This is a retrospective of that series, its key players, and its lasting legacy. This is TUFtwenty.
TUFtwenty is brought to you by The Contrarians, a movie podcast where we are right and you're wrong. Be sure to subscribe to The Contrarians on your favorite podcatcher for access to this entire series, as well as Julio and Alex's most recent film follies. Our main website, wearethecontrarians.com, houses all of our past episodes as well.
You can find The Contrarians across social media under the handle @ContrarianPrime.
It's not just us, though. As for this 14-part journey of nostalgia and shame, we've got a championship corner.
I'm Joe Holbert, and for years I've discussed fake fighting on the internet. Now, however, I'm trying my hand at the real thing. Usually, you can find me at the Late Night Grim, but for this particular adventure, I'll be sitting under the Team Couture learning tree, providing insight to my fellow men of honor.
It's niche micro-celebrity Steve. You may know me from Twitter, the Songs with Friends podcast, or various scuffles in the world of professional wrestling. By the end of this journey, you are no doubt going to feel this, because this is the ultimate.
Now that the cage door is locked, let's get down to business.
Time to talk asparagus.
What's up, Joe, Steve, and Julio? Forrest, Griffin here, giving you guys a bit of a shout out from your boy Alex. Now, he wanted to know, he had a few questions about The Ultimate Fighter. As you see the poster right there, The Ultimate Fighter, Season 1, 20-year anniversary. That's crazy. I'm old as dirt, but don't worry about that. Y'all are still young. Now, he wanted to know, one, did Sam really steal everyone's stuff? Well, I don't know that he stole stuff from people, but he took all the stuff from the shop that was meant to be for everybody. So yeah, he definitely took all the stuff, didn't even wear it or use it as intended, but packed it in his bag, including the supplements. So yeah, he packed them away like he was going to take them home or something. I don't even know. Were there any good stories that didn't make TV? I think just there were parts of the stories that were a little too much to air. You know, like the whole night we went out and got drunk, and Sam and Lieben got after it. That was pretty crazy. And then let's see. There's got to be something that happened that wasn't. I don't know, man. There was a lot of monotony, actually. Just train, beat each other up, sit around for 61 straight days. Now, he also, Alex, that is, wanted to know how I felt after my fight with Stephan, and did I realize the significance? Well, in my own mind, for me, I did, because I thought after that fight, I knew that I was now a professional fighter, not a cop and a professional fighter, not a student and a professional fighter, not a bouncer and a professional fighter, or a landscaper and a professional fighter, but a professional fighter first. And so then I knew that was my opportunity to kind of maximize my skill. So I knew my life had changed at that moment, and I was going to be, fighting in the UFC. So, Joe, Steve, and Julio, I hope you guys are doing something special to celebrate the 20th anniversary of The Ultimate Fighter. I am, actually. All right, peace out, guys.
Gentlemen, we have arrived. It is the Ultimate Fighter finale, live from the Cox Pavilion in Las Vegas, Nevada, taking us all the way back to April 9th of 2005. What a time it was to be alive. We, right before we hopped on recording here, we were talking about last night's UFC event and the differences in the sleeker appearance and whatnot. I think the guys today are happy they have locker rooms, because by the looks of it, everyone just kind of had to train in the same area backstage here for the finale. They all had a CRT television to watch what was going on in the cage, though. We have our 3-fight main card that we will break down in painstaking detail. We'll also review the preliminary fights that came before the event started on Spike TV. I guess we'll start with Julio, because this has been, your maiden voyage into the world of mixed martial arts. I'm just going to ask you flat out, and we're definitely going to circle back to it, but did the finale live up to the hype? Because we've done a lot of we'll just wait till we get here. Was the hype met here with the Ultimate Fighter finale?
I think so. I mean, not uniformly. I think that one of the fights was more satisfying than the other one, but it all made sense. People stayed in character. There were a couple of surprises. If I had to an early criticism, I would say that was like, 90 minutes, right? Like the big finale. And about 30 of those minutes were just recaps of stuff that we already watched. So I get why. I get that, there were people that hadn't watched The Ultimate Fighter and they were sitting there to watch these unknowns fight for the first time. So I understand that they needed to be caught up. But I knew about Asparagus. I knew about Fatherless Bastard. I didn't need like the play-by-play of like episode by episode. Like at first I thought it was going to be like a 5-minute recap. And then I realized that, oh no, they're going through the entire season leading up to this.
Well, the difference here, of course, is we have Mike Goldberg narrating what happened. But
it feels more official.
Dude, yeah, the recaps were like a sizzle reel of all of the things we've called out during this series that we've done. It even had that's your bus ticket home. It even had that one in there. So we got to relive all the great memories from the Ultimate Fighter house. The first voice that we hear on this broadcast is Mike Goldberg. And Joe, a blast from the past. He's in pure Mike Goldberg form here. But one thing that I didn't even consider until Julio texted me, as someone, Julio's case, watching with new eyes, the confusion of this broadcast starting with this man that we haven't seen this whole time and not Willa Ford. What the fuck, man?
That's true. That's a very different experience to what I had, which was like putting on like a cozy pair of slippers I hadn't had for a while, Oh, it's Mike. I was so happy. That is a good point, though. And there's definitely some elements to this presentation that you can sense they're trying to marry people that have started watching through the reality series and people that just like the fights generally, because that's where we get the season recap, right, that we were just discussing. So that's a fair point. But then once you meet Mike, you can't help but love him. He's kind of like a sort of confused dog, really, isn't he? Sort of wandering his way through the fights. I mean, he's just great company.
You want to talk about sizzle reel? Goldberg here had a list of quotes that he was going to get on the air no matter what. And in classic Mike Goldberg fashion, completely botches the pronunciation of simple words. He refers to Albuquerque as Agaquerque at one point, and he was nervous. He was in front of a larger audience than he had ever been before. Sidebar here, Julio, Mike Goldberg, this fella here, Vince McMahon once allegedly tried to pay him some obscene amount of money to no-show a UFC pay-per-view and come announce for the WWF. The underhanded techniques from a guy who certainly didn't see the Ultimate Fighting Championship as competition to his empire.
We should also, because I'm assuming, I don't want to, maybe I'm wrong, Alex, I'm assuming Mike Goldberg will not be a topic on our, where are they now? We should also note that, as we paint this sort of vivid picture of the UFC, that his eventual farewell would be handled without any grace or dignity whatsoever, and he would just simply sign off one last time without even a thanks or a salute. This is the ultimate.
There's no substitute for what's in store. Julio, when the UFC was sold, he was out pretty quick. I guess whoever the new powers that be didn't care for him. And just like Joe said, his last pay-per-view was, I believe, 207. I know it was when Ronda Rousey got her ass kicked by Amanda Nunes was the last event he did. And he was like the voice of the UFC and one of the most recognizable figures. And just like Joe said, they gave him a watch and a kick in the ass and said, get the fuck out of here. There was no thank you, Mike, for everything. On a more positive note here, Steve, when we begin our broadcast, I'm going to be honest with you. I forgot how good looking Rich Franklin was. No wonder they were trying to make this guy a star.
And the selling point was, you don't know who he is now, but you will in 2 hours, pals. We promise you. I was somehow aware of Mike Goldberg, even though I wasn't watching. I must have caught, back in the day, they would have 30-minute highlight shows on FX every once in a while. I must have caught one of those. I was far more shocked that the guy from Fear Factor was standing next to him.
Looking like a normal human being.
News Radio, Steve. The guy from News Radio.
There you go. In fear of, spoiler for Where Are They Now? I don't know if Joe Rogan, I don't know what he's doing these days. So, but he had a good little niche carved out here as the play-by-play guy. Color analyst for the UFC. Joe, we have talked about Rogan's, I guess, decline. He just obviously, his mind is a lot of places these days, and it usually doesn't translate to his work in the UFC on the commentary, from the commentary desk. Talk about, the warm slippers of nostalgia. I forgot when Rogan took it seriously, he was a pretty interesting commentator.
He was, and as much as a lot of us try to erase the memories we're currently discussing and delving into, he also, a lot of people's MMA understanding and knowledge is like exclusively based on what he would give you on color, because with love to Mike Goldberg, he was not giving you a great deal of analysis or insight. And Rogan was very insightful. And, you know, when the UFC's roster was small enough that he could know every person on it, he was great at that job. I mean, he really was. I think modern fans can't even imagine that being a real thing. But back in the day, they'd have 15 events a year, and you knew every fighter, and he knew every fighter. And he would, clue you in so quickly during their entrances, the pre-fight, all that stuff. It's very different now. I mean, putting aside everything else, and there is a lot to put aside, granted, but even as just a fight commentator now, it's like, you can tell he just kind of shows up and wings it, right? Like, he knows the guys he knows, and that's that. It's a shame. They were a great team. I mean, a ridiculous team. One of the things that made them a great team was that when Goldberg would be dumb, Rogan would be like, man, you're being real dumb right now, but in a very playful way. Again, the dog comparison I made. They were a great team. Yes, they were.
Just wait, Joe. Now that he has the power of the White House behind him, he'll be able to really reach heights with his color commentary that he never even dreamed of before.
I didn't think of that. Yeah. I'm not sure it's true, but I didn't think of it.
His thing now is, because here he was like, business casual. No, this was more like, business vacation Joe Rogan. Here's his attire. Now he wears like the button up with like the top two buttons undone. Unless Trump is there, then he'll button it all the way up, and it looks like his neck's going to fucking explode.
Joe's attire at this point, he was ready for the big after party at Cedar Rapids at the insurance convention.
And Goldberg, since we're talking about fit checks here, man, looks like someone who definitely would have sold you cocaine in 1994. Like, his outfit here is just outstanding. We have a lot to get to here with our ultimate finale, but before we do, this is a movie podcast after all, Julio. So we have some discussion points of movies that were released the weekend of April 9th of 2005. So what reigned supreme that weekend at the box office?
All right. First, we're going to check in on the previous movies. So we had Sin City, Guess Who, Beauty Shop, Robots, and Miss Congeniality 2 reigning the previous weekend. Now, for the weekend of April 8th, we had a couple new contenders that made their way into the top 5. So Beauty Shop went from number 3 to number 5, made $8 million for a total of $27 million. Queen Latifah holding on right behind Bernie Mac. Guess Who went from number 2 to number 4, $8.6 million for a total of $52.6 million. And then our first new contender debuted at number 3, and this is Fever Pitch. The malign Fever Pitch, at least on my side, uncontestable proof that Jimmy Fallon cannot lead a movie. And obviously does better. Your mileage may vary, but does better with his late show than he would ever do as the lead in a romantic comedy. How do you cast Jimmy Fallon opposite Drew Barrymore? How did you think that was going to work out? Not very well, except that it made $15 million. So it still landed at 3. Do you think with a better lead, Alex, I don't know how many of you have seen Fever Pitch, but do you think with a better lead, it makes it to number 1?
It's literally just plug in, the new Adam Sandler. Because, that's kind of the history of Jimmy Fallon was the heir to the Sandler throne, is kind of the cute younger guy on SNL that laughed in every skit. And then Andy Samberg came along, and I guess Pete Davidson would be the spiritual successor to that now. So it just feels like just the premise feels like it was a movie that Drew Barrymore and Adam Sandler would have made, but they got the other guy instead. But it was a Farrelly Brothers movie, and was it Peter Farrelly that went on to win an Academy Award for Best Picture?
They were not the draws of this movie. The Boston Red Sox were the draws of that movie.
I can see that.
Because they had just won the series for the first time in 9,000 years or whatever it was. And they had to change the story in the middle of filming because the Red Sox finally won. So I think that was...
Dad, don't make excuses for the movie, Steve.
Dude,
America was high on Duncan in the fall of spring of 2005.
Dude, I didn't even put the timelines together until Florian in his profile piece said the Sox had just won the World Series. Like, holy shit, that was then. Yeah. I know, Julio, you're not much for baseball, and I don't even know if they have it over in the United Kingdom, but that was a BFD. Like, that's the only World Series I remember vividly watching every game, and like the nation was swept up in this idea of the Sox winning. David Ortiz was like the hero of the team, and they just released also stealing our gimmick here, but Netflix, there's like a 20th anniversary documentary commemorating the victory. So yeah, that's We jest, but that would have been the draw as a movie about the Red Sox.
He just reminded me, though, because that's based on Nick Hornby book. That was a draw for me. I was like, oh, the guy from High Fidelity and About a Boy and so on. So, but he's British. So, Joe, do you know if like the original Fever Pitch is about baseball? Definitely not about the Red Sox, right? It would be about a British sport with a British team.
I have no idea. I mean, I'm so out of the loop that when Alex said BFD, I assumed it was like a conference or something in baseball. And then about 2 minutes later, I kind of pieced that together retroactively. So at that point, I was kind of lost. I mean, I wouldn't look it up for you if you'd like, but I just, at this point in the game, I have to concede I have no answers to any of these questions. I'm innocent.
Yeah, it looks like here it's the Hornby's relationship with football and the Arsenal Football Club. So
okay.
Nothing more American than that, taking something like just put a new fresh coat of paint on it. Here you go. Socks.
Yeah. Well, Jimmy Fallon, All-American Boy, did not go on to become the next Adam Sandler, did not go on to star in Uncut Gems. Sadly.
Can't imagine.
Oh my God. I owe my uncle money, or my brother-in-law.
All right, so he was number 3. Number 2 was the previous number 1, Sin City, 18 million. Robert Rodriguez, total 54.6 million. I figure Sin City has a couple more weeks at least in the top 5, because that was a big thing. And then number 1, kind of coming out of nowhere. I don't know, Alex. I don't know if anybody remembers, like if there was much of a build up to this, but Sahara, Matthew McConaughey, Steve Zahn, Penelope Cruz, based on a book by Cliff Cussler, I think.
Yes. And boy, oh boy, what a story. So we're going to, gentlemen, if you'll indulge me, we're going to take a quick here road trip down the story of Sahara, the 2005 film starring Matthew McConaughey, Steve Zahn, Penelope Cruz, as Julio just said. And I was texting Julio, like arranging what the lineup was going to be for this episode, I told him, I was like, I'm going to try to watch it so I can provide a review. And then I saw it was over 2 hours, and there's only so much, time in life. But reading about it was a goddamn hoot. So this was shot in 2003 on location in Morocco, as well as the UK. It became notable for its many production issues, including doubling its production budget from 80 to 160 million, and a series of lawsuits that followed. Sahara grossed 119 million worldwide, ultimately failing to recoup all of its costs, and is often listed among the all-time biggest box office failures. Now, the lawsuit came from Clive Cussler. Again, this is now I'm just going off the top of my head from what I remember reading, but basically it had to do with creative control and what could be like in the adaptation, what couldn't be, because the original idea of this, according to the Mahay, was they were going to turn this into like he was going to become, what's the character's name here, Dirk. It was basically going to be like the new James Bond or Mission Impossible. Like it was just going to be a line of movies where McConaughey played this character. Didn't quite work out that way. Amongst other issues, it was initially greenlit for 80 million. Rose to 100 million by the time of shooting and ballooned to 160 by the time production wrapped, with over 60 million in distribution expenses, listed as one of the most expensive flops of all time. The LA Times presented an extensive special report on April 15th of 2007, dissecting the budget of Sahara as an example of how Hollywood movies can cost so much and to produce and fail. Many of the often closely held documents that have been leaked after a lawsuit involving the film, among some of the items in the budget were bribes to the Moroccan government, some of which may have been legally questionable under American law. So they're just paying Morocco off to, I guess, do what they needed to do to shoot. More insane, to promote the film, Matthew McConaughey drove his own Airstream trailer painted with a large Sahara movie poster on each side across America, stopping at military bases and many events such as the Daytona 500, where he grand marshaled the race, premiering the movie to fans, signing autographs, and doing interviews at each stop. The trip's highlights were shown on an E-channel special to coincide with the release of the film, and McConaughey also kept a running blog of his trip on MTV's website. So we need to fire up the Wayback Machine for this. And according to McConaughey, this film was intended to be the first in a franchise based on Cussler's Dirk Pitt novels. Critically, it wasn't like eviscerated, but 38% on Rotten Tomatoes currently. And it had that powerful opening weekend. And then, yeah, there's, if you care to look into it, the legal action surrounding it that got resolved like years after the fact. Like, I think this was in court until 2012, 13, something like that.
The judge watched Interstellar, and it's like, that's okay. We forgive you.
Yeah, dismissed. We're out of here. So that was your number one box office king.
Yeah, 23 million that opening weekend. And I guess you can be number one, but still be very much in debt by the time your run is over. Apparently.
Yeah.
I knew that Sahara hadn't been a hit, Alex, not because of the box office numbers, but just because if you go to any bookstore and you happen to go past the Clive Cussler section, Sahara still just says Sahara. It's not like, it doesn't have the poster of the movie on the cover or anything. It's just, you wouldn't know that it's the Matthew McConaughey movie. And, you know, that has to. They usually use that as a selling point whenever it's a popular movie. Well, I guess now I won't be watching it. I was thinking that maybe I needed to watch it for just common knowledge, being up on my pop culture, but I think you've told me everything I need to know.
Yeah, I think basically what it's told us is that if we're ever at a loss for a movie to cover on the podcast, it may be one to have on the back burner there. Unfortunately, Matthew McConaughey, nor Steve Zahn, nor even Penelope Cruz to promote this movie hosted Saturday Night Live on the night of the Ultimate Fighter finale. That duty went to Cameron Diaz, and what she was promoting, I still am trying to reconcile in my mind. This is a transition here to our music countdown here, what the top 5 songs in the nation were at that time, because I'm pretty sure one of them is going to be our musical guest that was on this episode of Saturday Night Live. So, Steve, what was in people's ears and on the radio?
Well, as we wind down our journey here, the one thing that can't stop, won't stop is 50 Cent's dominance over our great nation. Disco Inferno fell out of the top 5. That was number 6 that week. Boulevard of Broken Dreams dropped from number 2 to number 5.
Oh, no.
But I have reason to believe they probably kicked back up the next week because they were, in fact, the musical guest on SNL. His fateful night in 2005. Number 4, Obsession, Frankie J and Baby Bash. Number 3, The Game featuring 50 Cent with Hate It or Love It. Number 2 is 50 Cent, You Better Watch Your Back because Kelly Clarkson is coming for you. Climbing the ranks.
Hell yeah.
From number 4 to number 2 with Since You Been Gone. And number 1, 50 Cent featuring Olivia with The Candy Shop.
Tremendous. As we mentioned, Green Day was the musical guest on SNL. They did perform Boulevard of Broken Dreams and Holiday. In classic fashion, I had to track down a TV rip on YouTube because SNL musical performances are one of the more litigated pieces of media out there and kind of hard to track down from time to time. Steve and I both watched this episode of SNL on Peacock. Steve, hit us with what you would consider the highlights of this Cameron Diaz hosted episode.
The first highlight is, of course, the jeans that were also sported by Josh Koscheck for much of the Ultimate Fighter run. The opening skit was around the time they were looking for a new pope. And Al Sharpton was part of the debates too.
Dude, that's
to declare his candidacy.
The first, one of the first people you see on this is Kenan Thompson, who's still, in the game. And this was back when SNL was in 4:3 ratio. So that man lived through the advent of a high definition television.
That's something I was looking forward to that was cut from the Peacock version. There's a TV Funhouse bit with Michael Jackson.
I wonder why they cut it.
To try to get him out of trouble, they fitted him with special glasses and make every woman look like Emmanuel Lewis from Webster.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I can see why that didn't make the cut. Of course, the Barry Gibb show featuring the aforementioned Jimmy Fallon pulling double duty that week.
Unadvertised cameo by Drew Barrymore in this. So I guess the idea was getting the buzz out about their movie. She played Ann Coulter in this skit, and I thought her impression was actually pretty funny. But yeah, this was only the second time they did that. Are you familiar, Julio, with the Barry Gibb talk show when they bring in Justin Timberlake?
No, sadly, I am familiar with Ann Coulter, though. So Drew Barrymore was making fun of her. I'm all in.
Really pronounced impression. But the Barry Gibb talk show is it's Jimmy Fallon and Justin Timberlake, and they're the Bee Gees, and they sing everything. And the whole thing is Barry Gibb is very testy and gets mad and yells at his guests. Cameron Diaz played Nancy Pelosi in the skit, which was also pretty funny.
Wow.
Topical.
I don't know that she could play her today. I'm surprised that she played her 20 years ago.
The two big Diaz contributions, I thought, were her monologue in which she was an ugly duckling who was a reasonably attractive teenager with her high school pictures, and was comparing her to all the horrific, real ugly duckling pictures that the other castmates had. As well as the Extreme Makeover Home Edition, of which she was a chronically ill and dying person who did not know that she was ill until the Extreme Makeover people came.
When I was looking at this, it's like, what the fuck would she have been promoting? Because I didn't remember, Shrek was the year before, and I didn't know, or Shrek 2, excuse me. I couldn't put it together in my head. So when she took the stage and she plugged her new MTV show, Trippin', I was like, what the fuck is she talking about? And so I looked it up, and Trippin' was a 2005 MTV environmental documentary television series hosted by Cameron Diaz. It featured other celebrities, including Drew Barrymore, Redman, Jessica Alba, Eva Mendes, Mark Hoppus, and Justin Timberlake. On the show, said celebrities visited various ecological locations around the world, in particular underprivileged areas.
So they went to Redman's Cribs apartment?
I just imagine, these fucking rich celebrities just like, oh man, it must suck to live here. That's probably what the show was. It ran from March 28th of 2005 to May 30th of 2005. So, at least she got an SNL hosting gig out of it. But that was Trippin'. Coming soon to the Contrarians, Trippin', a 20-year retrospective. Live comedy in the bag here. And of course, we don't have any Raws to recap as this was on a Saturday night, but I did find out what our friends at the World Wrestling Federation were up to. It's one of the more classic WWF things. They ran 2 house shows that night, one in Sydney and one in Perth, Australia, which is the distance between those two is tantamount to like LA to New York. We had the Raw crew in Sydney with William Regal and Tajiri defeating La Resistance, Tyson Tomko defeating the Hurricane, Chris Masters defeating Val Venus, Victoria over Molly Holly, Shelton Benjamin and Christian. He beat Christian to retain the Intercontinental Championship. Muhammad Hassan over Chris Jericho. Kane defeated Edge. And in the main event, Batista and Chris Benoit defeated Ric Flair and Triple H. And then on the other side of the continent in Perth, the SmackDown crew brought us Paul London defeating Funaki, Spike Dudley, and Scotty 2 Hotty in a 4-way for the Cruiserweight Championship. Booker T defeating John Heidenreich. Hardcore Holly, defeating Luther Reigns, brother. Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio defeating the Basham brothers. Tori Wilson beating Dawn Marie. After Carlito, Caribbean Cool, and Mark Jindrak got involved. My God. Big Show defeated Kurt Angle. Rene Dupree defeated Charlie Haas. Is there a more 2005 house show match than Rene Dupree and Charlie Haas?
My God.
And John Cena defeated John Bradshaw Layfield to retain the WWE Championship. Busy day for the traveling and the World Wrestling Federation.
What kind of mic work did Muhammad Hassan do in Australia?
Yeah, for real.
I was wondering the response to that. I'm kind of fascinated by they did 2... They had both brands in Australia. Is that a thing they've done ever since or before?
That's what I meant. Like, and especially the distance between the two, because that's literally the 2 points of the continent, like the 2 sides of it. In the 80s, brother, they would have been like, all right, you got to make Sydney and Perth in the same day, dude.
Double shot Sunday.
So brings to a close our time capsule of 2005 World Wrestling Federation. And like we talked about with our WrestleMania recap, fittingly, Batista and Cena both going out on top on their respective shows. That is not all the action that we had on April 9th of 2005, though. We're fixing to get to our main card here. But Joe, it's a UFC event, so we got some prelims to get through. And in this case, a kind of special twist on that. Something that I don't believe we ever saw again, where the UFC brought back all of the guys from the house and paired them off in a series of fights that took place before the main card started. I know for most of the Ultimate Fighter finales, they'll bring back some guys, but I don't remember it ever being structured exactly like this, because eventually they started adding like other fights on with new fighters and stuff like that. So this was individualistic.
Certainly, and I think that's most reflective. I mean, there are some fighters here who there's no way they'd be brought back for any other season. I'll get to one in a moment. I would like to note before we dive into these fights that Joe Rogan was completely unaware that the Ultimate Fighter fights did not count on their record until the first fight begun, and noted as much, and was very confused. And as you can imagine, Mike Goldberg had no answer for him and just kind of shrugged. Poor Josh Rafferty didn't really seem like a great fit at any point during the show, and he was not a great fit in the octagon after all. He was swiftly stopped by Alex Karalexis. One fight that I think we need to get the tape. we need to get the tape to Julio ASAP. Mike Swick, Alex Schonauer have a 30-second shootout, and it is an insane, almost barroom brawl. And Mike Swick turns the lights off on the feared Alex Schonauer, who I could be wrong. I don't think he ever got stopped. Other than Mike Swick, he punched hard. I could be wrong on that. I didn't.
He put him out
yes,
cold.
Out cold. Which would be, that would, we kind of talked about this previously, but Mike Swick, Quick Swick was a for real thing.
Wait. Okay, so I'm getting my Alexes mixed up maybe. Who is the Argentinian guy that turned
Schonauer.
up?
Yeah.
Oh, and Mike Swick, put him out in 30 seconds?
Completely iced him.
Yeah.
That's a bummer.
Alex Karalexis is Boston Alex, right?
Yeah, he's the guy that the first guy Diego killed, and Diego's motivation behind it was he was tired of hearing him say fuck. He was like, he's saying that 4-letter word and I don't like it.
Man, it's been a while.
Our hero, Nate Quarry, gets his chance at last to enter the octagon. He takes on Loden Sincade. It's almost like they wanted him in the UFC. Nate looks pretty nervous, but this is a very favorable matchup for him, and he just kind of picks away at Loden until Sincade's ready to go home, and quickly that is the case. Very much one-way traffic, and in a rare, especially for this time, a standing stoppage in the UFC here because he's getting just lit up so much. So a win there for Nate Quarry, who obviously we'll cover when we talk about what the guys were going to do. Josh Koscheck, with a violent entry into the UFC officially, stopping Chris Sanford with some violent ground and pound, knocked him out cold, ground and pound, in fact, on the map.
Mm-hmm.
We never saw Sanford fight, right, on the show? He was one of those people that got cut just based on the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Alex or Sanford got cut before they knew they would be fighting. That's how early it was.
Yeah. As you can kind of see,
Chris's.
The next one will really highlight this. The matchmaking was very clearly there are some guys we'd like to use in the UFC. Let's give them, pretty favorable matchups. There's one exception to that, which is coming up. But, Koscheck, very explosive finish. Here it is, the funniest fight of the prelim lineup. Chris Lieben and Jason Thacker. Who, even Thacker must have been like, really? You want me back more? To be fair to him, he tries his very, very best at the opening bell here, and that ends very, very quickly. Early slugfest, he ends up on his back and is then swiftly stomped out by Chris Lieben, which, Alex, as you mentioned, I'll posit you for this. This leads to a sort of post-fight ceremony of sorts, which you can speak to.
Yeah, Lieben just beats the shit out of Jason Thacker and then takes the mic to apologize in front of this live audience and eventually, a home audience on DVD and streaming. And he apologizes for pissing on his bed, and in case there's so many people there that have no idea this was a reality show, so many people that got comp tickets to it that are like, he did what now? Is this a lover's quarrel? What's going on here?
This is storytelling at its finest.
Absolutely. Yeah,
paying off something from the very first episode.
Mm-hmm. And it completed Lieben's arc,
Yeah.
In the featured prelim, this is a big one. There was a lot of issues with these two fellas. Bobby Southworth, Sam Hoger. It finally happened. And they had a really bad fight here on the tough finale. Sam Hoger is just a deeply unsettling man to watch throw hands. This quickly takes a familiar shape to the Forrest Griffin fight. He is again sporting that very strange face that I struggle to describe. He is narrowly outpointed for most of the first round, but then lands a late shot that rocks Bobby Southworth here at the buzzer. Yes, indeed. They continue into the second round. Things do not get particularly dramatic. Hoger does, again, occasionally sort of buzz Southworth and seemingly confuse him. I think Bobby was also bemused by the face of Sam. The third round is a little more lively. Southworth has his best stretch in the fight, but then gets stopped by a takedown. And on points, Sam Hoger wins to a confused crowd, I think it's fair to say. This fight is not the most appealing, unfortunately. But that is our prelims for the tough finale. As you said, Alex, a unique batch for sure. And I think a little bit of a surprise, I'd imagine. I'd imagine when they put it together, they thought Bobby was going to win that last prelim, to be honest with you. The other fights went exactly as they intended for them to go. So,
yeah. Did Sam Hoger grab the mic and apologize for stealing everybody's stuff?
He didn't, but he showed up with a buzz cut, which made him even more unsettling. Very, very striking. Because you're used to him looking one way, and then suddenly he switches it up on you, but he still has the face. I mean, it's horrifying.
It's hilarious you say that, Julio, or ask that, because It's going to come back up here in a minute. One of the sizzle reels. The legacy of Sam Hoger lives on through a very tremendous sound clip. But yeah, the ultimate heel turn would have been if he came out wearing like Stephan Bonnar's hoodie. Like he came out and he was like, I did steal it. Red light on, boys. It is time for the finale. We get our opening here, and Joe and Steve, you can speak to this, have an experience with shows from this era. They try to make this look like their pay-per-view presentation. They started off like Julio, the opening here with the gladiator with the sand going through his hands and like the orchestral music. This is how, for several years, the UFC's pay-per-view event started, and some of the best parties and anticipated sports moments of my 20s were spent with Stem's Face the Pain blaring in the background here with
like I almost Gladiator? Is it always like the Gladiator footage?
It was from like 2000 probably 3 until Joe, probably like the Conor McGregor era is when they stopped doing that stuff.
Was it when they switched to, I don't know what year it was, when they switched the one where it's like their fight clips and they're like breaking up the walls and the octagon appears. Remember that?
Yeah. I wasn't a big fan of that. I mean, why fix what's not broken? And this is
well. Look,
so
Alex, I'm willing to co-sign most of the nostalgia. This is the Gladiator deal, man. I can't do it. I never could.
It's so stupid, but I fucking love it. I almost got like a bout of anxiety. What I always think of when it gets to like the preamble to the chorus in the song is the Chuck Liddell Vanderlei Silva fight. I remember like watching that pay-per-view when they were showing their clips back and forth. It was like, oh my God, it's going to happen. Not quite the same here of Kenny Florian, just the same clip of that elbow over and over and over again when they show his hype package here. But yeah, this was how the pay-per-view started. They would have a couple words from the participants, then go into this intense music video and then cut to Joe Rogan and Mike Goldberg. And Goldberg here with some prophetic words says we're making television history tonight. He introduces Joe Rogan as his ultimate partner. Take from that what you would like. And then, Steve, we immediately cut to Ken Shamrock, who's already in his robe and, is ready to fucking go. God. Shammy, like, we'll talk about Ken Shamrock both here and on our, Where Are They Now? But for this, he just looks like a god here in that boxing robe he has on.
Well, throughout the night, I mean, it starts here. The introduction is Ken Shamrock is 41 years old, but he's better than ever. And then with each check-in, they're like, all right, man, he's pretty old, but I think he can do it. And they're like, oh, man, he's old as dirt, but just you wait and see. And then at some point, it starts shifting to the opponent, to Rich Franklin. Ken Shamrock is old, but Rich Franklin's not. And you're going to learn a lot about him this time when they fight.
Joe, Rogan here is going on and repeatedly says this is the best version of Ken Shamrock, like Steve was just saying. Do you think that's true? I mean, Shamrock had some eras, some phases for sure.
I think the way he's... God, now I'm trying to think like Joe Rogan. Man, the paths we've taken on this. I think the idea is that like his skill set is more developed because the game has developed considerably since his physical prime. I just don't... I struggle to buy it, even though he may be more like skillful because of that. Like, as we'll get to, the sort of general punch resistance, and he just isn't the same guy in terms of the fire either, right? Like, it's just impossible to compare. But I think that's the mindset, is like the sport has evolved so much, and he was one of the old guys who stuck with the sport.
Yeah.
And I think that's the line of thinking. But obviously, he was meeting someone in this case that didn't have to catch up at all. He had just walked into the sport like this. It's very different.
So you would disagree with the assessment that present day Shamrock would defeat younger Shamrock? Because that's something that they say like three times.
I just think on the fire of young Shamrock, I disagree. I think, it's just, he's just a different man.
A big part of that they leave out is that there was no drug testing in the original Ultimate Fighting Championship. And like Ken Shamrock in that first UFC looks like an action figure. And like, he was so explosive, but still was just like gigantic and cut. That's what made him such like the original draw of the UFC. Yeah, I don't know. Old Ken Wayne Shamrock. Now I need to fire up one of the UFC games and have old Shammy versus new Shammy and see who comes out on top.
I think, didn't they have that exact like setup for you on the EA game. EA MMA had both young Ken and old Ken. You can do it, brother.
The one thing I'm happy about though here is that he abandoned those sideburns, Joe. The Ken Shamrock, the razor sideburns he had going. That was a very unfortunate look.
That's the TNA World Champion sideburns.
That's iconic. He should have let it run. He should still look like that now. I refuse to this critique. You have the gladiator intro. I have the sideburns, right, Alex?
Fair enough. As Julio called out, a big part of the opening of this is just recaps of the show with Mike Goldberg explaining to the audience, what happened and whatnot. The quotes are all there. We've called out from this series. One I was not expecting, and I was in mid sip of my drink that caused me to choke a little bit, was it trails off, and I think it might even be the end of the segment where he's talking about at the house people became suspicious of Sam Hoger stealing things, and then they just insert Stephan Bonnar going, sure would be nice to have a beanie, and then fades out.
This recap went so long, there was a commercial break in the middle. Yep. It stretched for 2 segments.
They were making sure the audience knew what was at stake here. We do get a thorough breakdown of the rules. Joe, explain to us here the premise and idea of octagon control. I miss hearing Mike Goldberg say that, to be honest.
Oh dear, this was always the first thing on a controversial decision would be, what is octagon control? And then Mike would begin to question what he explained to us at the start of the broadcast. Octagon control, I think, is best probably cited as, like, especially back then when guys were not exactly prolific counter strikers, who's kind of dictating the center of the octagon and therefore dictating the sort of pressure and pace of the fight. Now, obviously, that would eventually become kind of useless because guys would willingly give up the center of the octagon to land counter strikes. This is in an era where Chuck Liddell throwing counter punches made him like a sort of scientist of sorts. This was before that was commonplace. So I think that's the easiest way to put it, Alex. I don't know. What do you think?
Every pay-per-view used to start like this, Julio. It was like the Ultimate Fighting Championship is based on a 10-round must system and based on grappling, effective striking, and octagon control. It was like the same preset tape that they had every time that played. Yeah, it never made any sense. MMA judging still makes no sense. Yeah. Like just going off what we've talked about up until this point, that's one of those things that's so ambiguous, the idea of octagon control, because some people, as we've seen, think if you're active off your back, then that wins you around versus being held down. So it's not even nebulous. It's just this stupid phrase they made up, and they're like, all right, we're going to get this, we're going to trademark it, and Mike Goldberg's going to say it on every fucking show that we do.
It's their ring generalship, isn't it? That's what it is. They have to have their own take on that cliche.
It's their championship opportunity. They just refer to it as octagon control.
My interpretation of it was always like, who is setting the pace of the fight? Right. There was a terrible example of this was years later. There was a Clay Guida Diego Sanchez fight.
Oh, all time.
Clay literally like ran from him the whole time, but he was setting the pace. He was choosing the terms of engagement. I'm like, well, a argument could be made that he won that aspect, but literally none of the others.
That was a split decision win for Diego, and the 2 cards he won, he got a 10-8 first round, and then the other one, Clay won the second 2 rounds. It was that fight's awesome. It's classic Clay Guida. He'd lost, but got a hell of a fight out of it. That's Clay Guida fought last night, so he's still riding off that fame.
So this is why Dana White is right when he says that you don't leave it to the judges.
True. The conclusion from this show, for anyone who's not picked up, is Dana White is right. That was what we were going for.
At some point in this also, they, I'm just imagining Dana and Gorilla on the headset telling him what to say, because Goldberg does say they're the best conditioned athletes in the world. And that's a fact. We get our profile pieces on our middleweight finalists, Diego Sanchez and Kenny Florian. Not before we get a shot of Michael Clark Duncan in the crowd, which made me go, oh, he seemed like such a nice man. Yeah. And he was like, him and Kevin James are there, and they were like the OG celebrities that would go to these. And they keep showing that douchebag from Entourage in the crowd.
Grenier.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my God, that's the best they could do. Not even the whole cast. They just got the one guy.
It would have been better if it was just Turtle there, We see back in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Diego Sanchez. We need his family. He's training. Pop for Greg Jackson. who would go on. Diego's coach here, Julio, is one of the more famous coaches in the history of the UFC. He trained many, many world champions, George St. Pierre, John Jones, et cetera, et cetera. So he's determined. He's a Christian. He pulls that up at one point. He's very happy. It's going to be God's will to do this shit. That's how Diego thinks. On the other side of the country, back in Boston, big pop from Mark Delagrati, training Kenny Florian up. And same thing. We meet him, his family. He just explained that the Sox just won. So, it's a fun time in Boston. And he's going to bring the Ultimate Fighting Championship contract back home with him. It is time for our middleweight finale. We get some tremendous free use music here. To skip ahead a little bit, Steve, did you catch that Forrest Griffin came out to Insane Clown Posse?
No, I was distracted by my excitement of knowing that Julio was about to experience this fight for the first time. So yeah, I missed that altogether.
So Alex, hang on. So going in to this, right? Did you guys have like a preference? Like, it's specifically like at the moment after you get the packages, because I think even if you've watched the show, you never got an insight into what these guys were as people until you get to see them with their families, with their friends, outside. And that I think could affect how you go into the fight, especially if you didn't have a preference before. I felt that Kenny comes across as like the underdog, which instantly made me want him to win when they do these two. Diego is definitely humanized just by the fact that we see him with his parents. And I was like, all right, he's no longer that weirdo that was all about the yoga and the Jesus catchphrases. Like he has like a dad and a mom and,
And how did that dad spawn this yoga son?
Dude, when they showed his dad, I was like, why didn't we get a series on this guy? Look at this fella, man. I want to know his whole story. The first thing Joe Rogan says when Diego's walking out, he goes, he's a bit of a unique individual. He's kind of strange. He does yoga and then just like leaves it at that. Myself, we talked about this in our previous episode, and I think Joe and Steve, we were kind of all in the same boat. In watching this, Kenny Florian is a nice fella, but he definitely seemed like a lamb led to the slaughter. And upon this rewatch, I was thinking about like, God, what would that Lieben-Diego fight have looked like? Because Lieben, I think, in my opinion, who was a natural 185er, if they fought on this night, I think Lieben would have been too strong for Diego. I don't know what that fight would have looked like, but I know Diego couldn't have had his way with him like he does with Kenny here. But back to your original point, I respected the tenacity and the effort from Kenny Florian, but I just think this was, Joe, I don't know if you agree, this was way too much to ask of him.
It was, yeah, just physically. And it's interesting because, like, again, if we're getting ahead of ourselves, if these two were to fight at 55, years later, I think I'd see it differently because Kenny really does develop a lot. And I just think at 85, man, he just gets manhandled. And you kind of saw that in the Lieben fight, right? But he just hung in there. It's one thing hanging in there on the feet, and, Kenny was very, very durable, but Diego's like on the mat is different, as we saw here very, very quickly.
Yeah, Diego obviously would have a prosperous career, but I think you could say from this point, if you look at what they became, Kenny Florian evolved more as a fighter.
Definitely.
And like I said, and it's funny, I remember Julio's reaction was like, what? He became a vicious finisher. And, he projects this image as such a nice guy. But Julio, how quickly into the fight were you like, oh no, Kenny?
Well, because of the Chris Lieben fight, I still held hope that he could just surprise us. I was like, maybe he has another elbow in him that he can just use and knock Diego out. When it wasn't over within 30 seconds, I was like, all right, maybe we're onto something. But then there is that moment there where he just gets on top of him and you're like, yeah, that's it. It's done.
The referee agreed with you.
Yes.
For once, because the Steve Mazzagatti was the ref on this. It could have very easily become a crime scene.
Oh, I didn't
He was having it off
Speaking
day.
of Steve, they come out and circle for like 25 seconds about throwing a punch, and Steve's like, come on, boys. Let's get this guy in here. What is this? Some sort of sport? Come on, fellas.
It's a kind of auspicious beginning to this because the crowd starts booing and you think of like, man, if this show had sucked, like, Dana White, he would have joined was it FMW or Pride, the guy who hung himself in the park to get out of the money that he owed.
FMW. A couple of things on the presentation here before the fight, but we see Lieben in the crowd, and like they didn't tell us at home that there were prelim fights. So He had a full ass fight that day. Got into his best sleeveless t-shirt and sat in the crowd like fucking Sean Waltman and Scott Hall at a NXT show.
He's there in his Cameron Diaz jeans. Got a good dip in. And they show Koscheck later too, and he's got like a contusion of sorts on his head. And you're right, they didn't explain that these guys fought earlier, so it's like, what happened to Koscheck on the way to the building?
But like I think UFC knew that our man Ken was overmatched because Ken just comes out in his ringer t-shirt. It's very unassuming, and then Diego's got a fucking mariachi band.
That was nasty, dude. We have to note for Julio, because this is actually really important. Because you may expect, Julio, there's a lot of like pageantry on UFC entrances. There is not. Like, there are legitimately to this day very seldom shows that have an entrance with this much like thought put into it. And it's just the Ultimate Fighter finale. They were all in on Diego as being a pay-per-view star, man. It's very, very obvious.
Joe Rogan calls him Diego Sanchez at one point. I thought that was pretty funny. Steve Mazzagatti, just for a bit of context for Julio, the referee here would go on to be infamous, and I think he's banned from officiating in the UFC now because he let several fights go way too long to the point of like, stop, he's already dead, like that type of shit. And also he made a really controversial call in Brock Lesnar's UFC debut that directly led to Brock Lesnar losing. So at least that was funny, you know?
You mentioned that we saw Chris leaving. He has a girlfriend. He's sitting right there next to his girlfriend. Talk about humanizing your contestants.
I couldn't see her name tag and which escort service she was from, but, you know. God bless. I hope she's doing well wherever she is today. This is our introduction to Bruce Buffer for the purposes of this program. And Joe, he knows that spotlight is on him because he is amped up for this show.
He is, which produces a moment later that I always remember regarding Bruce, which we'll get to. But yeah, he's locked in. Generally doesn't strike me as a guy who needs much motivation to have energy, but he certainly is excited to be on TV here this evening. And, you know, Mike Goldberg is sporting more nerves, but this is the moment Buffer's been waiting for his whole life. Finally, you know, he can become the Buffer, which is a thing, by the way. Quick side note. I've recently discovered there are like a narrow generation of people who know Bruce as the Buffer, and this is...
That's insane.
It's been an incredibly unsettling trend for me to discover. So congrats to him, I guess. This is where it starts.
The ring announcer here, Julio, Bruce Buffer, is the brother of Michael Buffer, who was the boxing announcer most famous for this catchphrase, "Let's get ready to rumble."
Okay.
And Bruce, now his phrase is, "It's time."
It's time.
Would we say, yeah,
It's time.
He's a character, and he would go on to perfect his moves of introduction, such as the Buffer 180, in which he would do a very sharp turn around to whoever he was introducing, which culminated in the legendary Buffer 360 at UFC 100, in which, while introducing Brock Lesnar, Bruce leapt into the air and did an entire 360 spin and then landed on his feet and said, "Lesnar." The best part of it is there's a fan cam of it that was recorded by Joey Diaz, and Joey Diaz is just going, "Holy shit, he did it! He did it!" Speaking of yelling here, when Diego wins, Dana runs down the list of things he's won, which is a UFC contract, a car, a dirt bike, and this watch. And when he says watch and hands it over, Diego goes, "Yeah!" Like it was the watch that he was most excited about. And then he talks about Jesus for approximately 75 minutes.
No
Dana
shit.
Also, like he said, Diego knew as soon as he got here he was going to be a future world champion. He uses that phrase. Now, he kind of frames it as like a Diego prediction rather than his own. But even putting that out there, like, again, you can see it, man. He sees... I honestly think there's not even a part of Dana's mind is even concerned. Like, the lightweight fight's a great fight, but this is the guy who thinks is going to be the champion, right? I think Diego's the guy he's looking at in that regard.
What do you guys make of our coaches? You know, as they're performing their final duties in a way. They get Chuck hands over the trophy. Randy hands over the keys to the new car.
All class. Just so dignified. It ain't getting better.
Randy knows where his bread is buttered because he's looking respectable. He's got the button up and the slacks on, but he's also wearing the Rockstar Energy hat because, you know, they're paying the bills, baby. He's got sponsors too. Meanwhile, Chuck, probably in the same clothes he was wearing the night before at the craps tables and shit, like, you know, jeans and Lars Fredrickson in the Bastards t-shirt.
We do get a Chuck cam, by the way. We should know we got a Chuck cam during this fight,
did.
right? Yeah.
I was very excited because the first time he was by himself, and then the second time they showed us his date.
After this is when they're discussing a little bit more. Joe, you already brought this up, but the fights on the show are billed as amateur fights, so they don't count on your professional record. The funniest thing to come from this, it's a deleted scene from the 4th season of The Ultimate Fighter. When Patrick Cote wins his first fight, he believes that he's won his first fight in the UFC, and so he gets like absolutely shit-faced and keeps saying like, I won a UFC fight. And it's like this thing in the house that no one at that point has the guts to tell him it doesn't actually count on his record. And so, Cote would eventually learn this, but
that season is so great, man. It's so
oh
great.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Now, I do want to make a quick note here before we get too far ahead of the sponsors.
Here we go.
At this point, we had an illustrious group. We had Zions, which was a supplement / energy drink deal. HRH. I don't know what the hell that is. Tap Out, Pitbull Energy, and UFC DVDs. Also, KenShamrock.com was plastered in some of the corners.
Hell yeah.
Far cry from today. Sorry, that fight from last night, Alex. I don't know if you noticed, but Craven the Hunter was just plastered on the mat.
They couldn't afford Pope's Exorcist, though. That was only only the World Wrestling Federation could afford sponsorship from that movie. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this was still, they didn't even have .com. It was UFC.tv. That's how the doldrums that they were in. They couldn't have a fucking domain. We get a bit of an explanation of like the evolution of MMA. Selfishly, I kind of would have liked to see, clips of fucking Hoist Gracie pulling Chemo's hair interlaced with the artistry of it is today, but I don't think they wanted to draw attention to the cage fighting days of UFC 1. We get more discussion about the main event that we're going to see, and honestly, Rogan has in hindsight and also in the moment, the smartest observation where he just basically says this was a bad fight for Ken Shamrock to take because no one knows who Rich Franklin is, and he's a really talented young guy. I had forgotten Rich had already beaten Jorge Rivera, and he knocked out Evan Tanner already at this point. So for sickos like us, Joe, he was definitely would have been already established, but no one would have known who he was.
Yeah, he really, and I'll give them credit for this. I'll never use the word classy for a UFC presentation, but you do get the sense at the end of the night that at least Goldberg and Rogan are not, oblivious to what Ken kind of did for the promotion that night, in the sense that he really had no reason to take that fight. And in taking it, he inadvertently allowed a guy to become a star on his name on national TV. Now, obviously, let me be clear, Ken intended to win the fight, but that's the risk reward of taking a fight like that, right? That's a huge moment for Rich that I think probably gets lost in history slightly because of what he goes on to do and so on and so forth. So, yeah, Ken really did him a solid with that. He had no reason to accept the fight, really.
And Steve, we're about to get into what this series, what arguably the UFC is known for in just a moment. So it's important to call out that this is all through the lenses of hindsight. In the moment, Ken Shamrock was the draw on the show and the reason people tuned in. Yeah.
Absolutely. He was a name, and I believe wholeheartedly that they knew what was going to happen. And Shammy was brought in as the star to make the new guy. You got a lot of new eyes on the product. They're pushing very heavily that Rich Franklin is young. He's well-rounded. He's a school teacher. He's not a dumbass like the rest of these ogres you've been watching all season. This is the future of the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
He's pissed in no one's bed. He's got that going for him.
Not a single spritzing is on his record.
In the most incredible transition of this broadcast, we see a shot of Kevin James in the crowd, to which Mike Goldberg says, "Ah, yes, the King of Queens, but who will be the King of Kings as we move into the light heavyweight finale?"
What an absolute legend, dude.
And we get our character pieces here on Stephan Bonnar and Forrest Griffin. We had talked about this, Julio, as the show progressed, but it's on full display here. Stephan Bonnar is a charming motherfucker, man.
Oh, really? That was going to be my comment about Forrest. I think
Forrest, obviously, but his personality was kind of always on display. Stephan was kind of in the background for half of the season, and when he comes across here, he's well spoken, and I guess you found both of these guys to be likable.
Yeah, my note for the very beginning, even before we get to the main fight, the opening little talking heads that they had from the beginning, I was like, my God, like Forrest really kicked it up a notch as far as just presenting himself as a like really down to earth. Like, I'm not taking this seriously. I'm just here to have fun, but I'm also going to kick ass. And I was like, man, whatever happens, I just hope Forrest wins. That was like my main thing. I mean, you're right about Stephan. I think that well, same thing as seeing Diego's parents and so on, right? Like there's that extra side of their lives that suddenly we see, and it really makes it more sympathetic. Like the fact that the gym where he works had like a banner that were like, watch Stephan fight. That's like, that was kind of adorable. But I was still rooting for Forrest. I think that Forrest comes across he's funnier and he's just more, even when he's being cocky and kind of, trying to tease his opponents, I think he still comes across as not being, his head's not stuck up his ass. And I felt like that was the case with most talking heads we got throughout the show.
To me, Stephan here was, Joe and Alex will understand this. He was very Bryan Danielson-esque in even the way he was taunting. When he closes his deal with, I need to beat this hillbilly. Reminded me when Bryan was doing his ROH farewell. It's like, slap John Cena. He's like, I'll walk right up to that son of a bitch. That same kind of everyman charisma. Then when we cut to Forrest, he's in Athens just drinking and watching TV. And he's like, yeah, man, it's this guy that Rory has really showed me a lot. He's shown me everything he's got. And to show for it, I'm sleeping in his living room without health insurance.
Pretty startling proclamation there that they kept on the show that he doesn't have medical insurance. And then Rory and Adam, I think, were the brothers, and Rory Singer basically got his shot on The Ultimate Fighter because he was Forrest Griffin's trainer, season 3. Yeah, the dichotomy here of it's great. You know, the Chicago, it's snowy, and then in Athens, it's sunny, and Stephan has the line of, I'm excited to fight Forrest on TV, but I'd be excited to fight Forrest in my backyard. I thought that was a pretty good line.
Well, it's also the dichotomy, Alex, of like these two versus the talking heads from Diego. Specifically Diego, not just his talking head in the intro, but also his outro, like his final, when Rogan is trying to get him to talk about anything but himself and Jesus. It really sours that win, in my opinion, because he may be a good fighter, a great fighter even, but do not give him a microphone. And that's something that we learned throughout the show, but specifically when he wins, my note is Diego's not a gracious winner. And then you transition to Stephan and Forrest, and it's the opposite. It's like, give them the microphone. Just let them talk as much as they want, because it really makes the fight more interesting.
And Stephan pointed out, too, kind of the hook of the reality show component. So my girlfriend doesn't want to watch fights, but you make it a reality show, and she's in, baby.
And the girlfriend here steals the fucking show, because I don't know if you caught it, but they're in the kitchen making dinner, and she goes, do you want some asparagus? And then like smiles and like winks at him. Joe, as I'm watching this and listening to the dialogue here, just the talking heads, the voiceovers and shit, the way they're talking about themselves and their level of enjoyment of fighting, like this isn't even a bit. Like I was listening to this, I'm like, oh, Jon Moxley stole a lot of this stuff, like for his character of like, I like black guys, like talking about like in a self-deprecating fashion. It probably was more in the Dean Ambrose era of his career. But if Moxley was here and I asked him, did you take inspiration from Forrest Griffin on some of your interviews? I wouldn't be surprised if he answered yes.
Yeah, which is, probably more advisable than what apparently he's taken inspiration from these days. And I'll leave that there and move on. But Forrest is just so likable here. Really, really tremendous stuff. And whoever made this package, the pre-fight, it must be so cool when you're doing 100 of these, right? And this one obviously is special, it's national TV, all that good stuff. You're making all these pre-fight videos. Because of what this fight becomes, how many people have seen this video that have not seen any other fight from like this decade, let alone this year, I was thinking about watching it, like, it's, you never know what these fights are going to pan out like, but I thought this pre-fight video did a great job of like unknowingly forecasting what was ahead, because whenever they talk about fighting, it's very apparent they're both aware this is going to be a dogfight. Like this is what this is, and it really sets the stage well, I thought. Tremendous stuff.
So that takes us to the fight, and as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I guess they had the rights to it and still do because it's played on here. Forrest Griffin enters to the Insane Clown Posse's Take It, which was a song written for WCW Mayhem, the album, as it was the entrance theme for the Deadpool the faction of ICP, Raven, and Vampiro, I believe. So
No, I didn't plan this to wear a sleeveless shirt today for this recording, but I'm going to go ahead and do the big reveal for the boys here. I have the
Hatchet Man.
But yeah, I didn't recognize the song, and now that you say it's from the WCW Mayhem album, that explains why I did not pick up on it.
It's just an insane. It'd been a while since I'd watched this, and I was like, wait, that's that song they wrote for Vampiro. It's a very strange, like, everything comes back to wrestling type moment. As Forrest makes his entrance, Mike Goldberg here channels the energy of Steve Williams in focusing solely on the hair of Forrest Griffin throughout the show and explaining that he found it very problematic and he was glad that he had a full head of hair again.
Mike Goldberg's a very conservative man with mid-Southern family values. The ever-evolving Mohawk into the LOD dual Mohawks into the whatever the hell was happening at the end just didn't work for him, brother.
Joe, we've talked about this already in the series of the idea of like the game face and, getting all serious for fighting and whatnot and how you can't fake it when it's genuine. Stephan Bonnar is dialed the fuck in here coming out to the cage.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's a great deal of overlap, I think, in their personalities, but there's also is that contrast, right? Where Forrest is playful and like even when he's getting hit, he's kind of like, oh, this is fun, Stephan Bonnar, that element is less apparent, and he has that kind of psycho switch that would become famous, and you definitely get it here both before the fight, and then there's a moment in the fight where he kind of just goes through the gears, and it sets the tone very much in terms of intensity.
Had they called him the American Psycho on the show before, or is this the first time that they reveal his moniker?
Yeah, I remember they were referring to Diego as the Nightmare on the show, but
yeah.
I don't think the rest of the guys had their nicknames. More concerningly, Mike Goldberg, while Stephan Bonner's walking out, he goes, RoboCop, and then moves on. Like, I don't know why he said RoboCop or called Stephan Bonnar RoboCop.
Can I just let him say stuff, man?
But who will be the King of Kings?
Alex, when do we get, because I have it here, but I don't know if it was like during the fight or right before the fight started, but when do we get the Chuck shot where we see Willa is right next to him?
So that's as our fighters are in the cage. First of all, Miguel Torres pop. Joe, did you catch Miguel Torres in Stephan's corner?
I did not. Wow. No, I did not.
Yeah.
Isn't that blast from the past? My God.
So while they're preparing, we get like the dignitary cam of going around. We see Josh Koscheck there giving the thumbs up. And then we get to see Randy and his wife at that time, Kim Couture, which LOL, if you know much about her story. And then, my notes in all caps and an exclamation point, Willa! She's sitting with Chuck Liddell there and completely, as Steve jokes, breaking kayfabe here, pulling down the wall of,
Was this the big reveal? Was this when America learned that they were dating?
No, because Goldberg's carny ass, he doesn't break kayfabe. He's like, there's Chuck sitting with the host of The Ultimate Fighter.
Until it never crossed my mind, but I texted Julio about that when he was basically the idea of like, if you watch a series and Willa wasn't the host, how confused you'd be. But then it pays off because it's like, there she is with Chuck, which I guess they shortly after that shot scooted her out of the way to install the Chuck cam to have on him the entirety of the fight. Bruce Buffer, not once, not twice, but thrice calls Stephan Bonnar Stephen Bonnar.
Yep.
It's, someone could have just smartened him up a little bit here. I realized watching this now that, rewatching it, Joe, I don't know if you got as emotional as I did. This was Coach Couture's last hope. Stephan was his guy that made it to the finals, and, he was a legit Team Green guy from the jump. And so this was, Randy had a lot riding on this.
Indeed, and the propaganda about the excitement of this fight is all there simply to hide the robbery that takes place and takes our victory. We start hearing nonsense like, there's no losers tonight. There should have been a loser tonight, but yeah, I'll get to it. Fight's good, I guess. But other than that, still dealing with the wounds, but we'll get through it.
I'm going to stay with you, Joe, flat out. Is this the most famous mixed martial arts fight in history?
Man, I think it's a great question. I think it's definitely a contender because here's the thing. It's obviously incredibly exciting. It's also exciting in a way that is fun for you and I, but also really fun for Julio, right? Like it's just, It has a very human dynamic of like the desperation both guys have. When you combine that with what especially Forrest would go on to do, you combine that with context, and then I think most importantly, with being real, you combine it with the fact that the UFC have embraced this as like the start. in a lot of ways. You know, before every UFC event, they do the Barbara O'Reilly deal, right? The Who track with the highlights. And nowadays, the oldest they go back is this fight. So much so, they show this fight in black and white in that video now.
Yeah.
So like, they'll show, like, you know, Mighty Mouse, or maybe not Mighty Mouse anymore, you know, the modern greats. And then it'll be like black and white, Forrest and Bonnar. And this is now like what Hoist Gracie was when I learned about it. You know what I'm saying? Like they would look at Hoist as the starting point. They don't anymore. They look at this. So I think because of that, I think these names are always tied together for that reason. It's definitely a candidate for sure.
So it's black and white, but the blood's still red?
I don't know. I'll have to revisit tape, hopefully.
Very Frank Miller, Sin City, you know, and influenced. You know, if we're counting dollars and views and stuff, this isn't the most significant fight in UFC history, but I think historically and the fucking onset of this, man, like what we're talking about, our mission statement here of how this show changed everything, it wouldn't have if this fight wasn't what it was. And I think for that, it's so special. And I'm getting goosebumps again right now. I legit got chills that first like exchange they had when they just start fucking going for it. I've seen this fight probably 10 times, and you know it's equally exciting every time. And one of the things, Steve, that I find myself upon every viewing is I'll start like trying to decipher who I think won, but then just kind of give up because like Forrest eats some nasty shots. He eats this knee that sounds disgusting in the second round. And Stephan eats shots too. And then even the grappling, like there's really no upper hand at any point. And it sounds so stupid that like there is no losers thing, but I guess they could have kept fighting. But when I watch this back, I have a hard time really like making my mind up about who won.
As much as we all like a winner, there's something poetic that neither one of these guys ended up on their ass. And that would have been the end result. I like that they both got to stand tall. The quick note, the middleweight fight was the first minute was nothing happening. Ramaz the guy, he's like, boys, hook it up. These bulls locked up 7 seconds in and just did not stop. By the time they were at the 155 mark, not quite 2 minutes into the fight, the crowd was up and they stayed up for the rest of the fight. At one point, Forrest does this deal. It's almost like what would happen if like a shoot Irish whip were to happen. Yes. Just a quick whip into the cage followed by an overhand. You're like, oh my God, what the hell is happening? But yeah, I watched the fight through that similar lens of trying to be more analytical and pick a winner. And even watching it nerd style with my notebook out, it could have gone either way.
Joe, you know, you and I jokingly are hyperbolic about a lot of things, but a lot of times when people try to in the moment say something is equivalent to or the best of, you know, definitely not something wrestling fans do, but when Rogan at the start of the second round declares the first round to be the Hagler Hearns of MMA, that is a fair comparison, I think.
It is, and I think it is only fair. We have our fun. I think those two together as a team do rise to the occasion here, actually, of giving this the soundtrack. Yeah. I mean, look, Mike Goldberg would have 1,000,001 bad calls. Welcome to the Ultimate Fighting Championship world, lived forever for a reason. It was the right call at that time. Man, this is just frenetic. I was being playful earlier. Obviously, I'm doing the Couture deal. Definitely a bit. No, I will say, I've always thought Stephan won this fight. I don't care because, you know, it worked out the way it worked out. And I think for history's sake, in terms of where the guys would, you know, their careers would evolve, I should be clear. It probably worked out the way it needed to, and there's more to their story in the cage and certainly out the cage. They both got contracts, so I get there's no loser thing, and I agree with Steve completely. I mean, both guys, it is bigger than a win and a loss, and I kid about that, but it's true. But I've always thought that Bonnar was like kind of hard done by in that way, you know, because it's unanimous, right? Unless I'm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's unanimous with split rounds.
Yeah.
Like 29-28.
Which is also interesting because Buffer chooses to read them one by one. He doesn't say all three judges go 20. He goes 29-28, and I'm like, okay, which? It's just all to the same guy. So, nonetheless, man, the pace, the energy, the moment in round two where there's a standing ovation, like.
Yeah. The theater is all here, Julio, even to the point where Forrest gets a nasty cut and we're wondering, is this the same cut from the show? You couldn't script this shit, man.
Yeah, it was his nose.
That's one of the great Chuck Cam shots is he looks very concerned and he stares up at the screen and then you can hear him just shout to someone, "It's fine." And again, cinematically, theater, whatever you want to use to describe it, one of the first things we talk about in the first episode is the sparring session with Forrest, Griffin, and Stephan Bonnar, how they're just going fucking hell for leather. And, Stephan gets busted open there. And I think one of us probably joked of, well, that's a sign of things to come. What Joe said is accurate. It's a fight that both the learned fans and casuals alike can enjoy. What were you thinking? You having a good time? You like going, holy shit? What's Julio Oliveira's read on Bonnar Griffin?
Well, it was certainly more exciting than Diego Kenny.
Yeah.
See, you guys are like making your notes and analyzing or whatever. I'm not, and especially because I do have I'm not being objective at all. I'm watching this and I want Forrest to win. If I watch it again, I guess I could try to be unbiased and see what Joe's saying, and be like, okay, I can see how somebody could make the argument that Stephan was the winner. But, when you watch it the first time, you're just going for your guy. And so you register his wins a lot more than, the other guys. Yeah, I was like, my God, I wish I could remember what exactly was making me think of. I mean, this is kind of like a storytelling classic, like a trope, right? Like the guys that will not fall down and they just keep fighting and fighting and fighting. I hate that the closest I can think of is the Superman Doomsday fight from the Death of Superman.
Fair enough.
They're fighting for like 5 issues, I think, until finally they both jump and they both die. It's slightly sadder ending than the one in this fight. But
end of Rocky 3, they should have just freeze framed it, and that's how it goes off.
Yeah, it was pretty exciting. I was worried a little bit because you can tell the moment where the energy dips. Right? Like they come out so hard at the beginning and then you finally start seeing the exhaustion halfway through the fight. And then there's an uptick a little bit.
Yeah.
Not because they're less tired, but just because it becomes kind of impressive that they're still fighting despite how tired they are. It was great. One of my questions was going to be, is this all really hyperbolic when at the end of the fight, everybody's just ranting and raving about how it's like the greatest thing they've seen so far? But based on everything you guys have told, in the past 10 minutes, like it seems like it is, right? They're not just overselling it for the sake of the camera. Whenever Rogan, Goldberg, everybody that gets like a turn at the microphone, their minds are blown by what they just saw. That's because it really was that. And I guess it still is up to a point.
Yeah. I think the reason it ages well is because it isn't, I don't want to dismiss the skill on display, but that isn't what makes the fight compelling, right? There are great fights that are like state of the art showcases of the sport, and there's like technical elements, and there are certainly some here, but this is, again, it's that human element of like, there's a great moment here where Forrest looks he's exhausted, and Bonnar puts his foot on the pedal and he tries to finish fight. He lands that knee Alex mentioned, and then he comes out of that with his hand on his hip. He's so tired, and it's like everyone can relate to that, right? Like beyond like, Alex and I, Steve's like, we may pop for like a sweet low kick or a Thai plum but anyone can relate to a guy walking in the middle of a fist fight with their hand on their hip, like, you're really still here. I think that's why it's so compelling. It's the perfect fight for this stage, I think.
Yeah, this fight is why people still watch, like with the anticipation of like maybe tonight there'll be another Griffin Bonnar style fight. Yeah, so for as hyperbolic and as idiotic as their claims can be, specifically that John Jones is the greatest fighter of all time, the UFC was in the right here of celebrating what had happened. Wrapping up my notes here, I did the hand on the hip. Before the last round, they are both dead in the corner, and then they both stand up and lock eyes, and it's, how can you not be romantic about combat sports, that type of thing. I had forgotten, I always forget, that they had this dumb idea for a 3-minute sudden death round. Like, whoever wins that wins the whole fight, which with the questionable nature of MMA judging, I'm glad they did away with that. The last big rally in the last round, Stephan Bonnar goes for a spinning head kick like he's fucking Edson Barboza. And, it looks good because he catches Forrest's arm and it fucking flails away. The clacks go off for the 10 seconds left in the round, and they look at each other and they nod and they go out swinging. It's an unbelievable moment. Welcome to the UFC world, as Mike Goldberg said. My note says, I still don't know who won and I don't care. They take forever to get the scorecards together. During this time, Forrest catches his visage on the Jumbotron and decries, "Damn, I'm ugly," which I thought that was pretty funny. It is a 29-28 unanimous decision for Forrest Griffin. He is now the Ultimate Fighter. Stephan Bonnar completely collapses, both out of drama and exhaustion after the decision's read, to which Bruce Buffer says, "Let's have a big hand for Stephan Bonnar." Can you imagine being like at that lowest of low moment? You lost this fight after all that, and this motherfucker gets your name wrong. Like that. Fortunately, the sadness wouldn't last very long, as I have here Coach Fit Check, which we already talked about their outfits. There's some bullshit chants here.
Joe was there.
Yeah, I was mad as hell in my green tracksuit.
Dude, to his credit, they cut to Randy still yelling instructions. He's not even in Stephan's corner, but during the fight, he's yelling at the cage instructions of what to do, because he's a real coach,
That he is.
Before we get to the post-fight interview, we get like a recap of the fight and the highlights, which we talked about Mike Goldberg sometimes just talking without thinking. And he says, "These two men proceeded to come and come and come again." And it's like, brother.
I was howling because that he thought it was like such a poignant thing to say, which made it so much funnier. He was so proud of himself,
Chuck Liddell is just the proudest parent you've ever seen in the cage after this fight. The way he's looking at Forrest, like the love in his eyes, and he like tells him fucking awesome, and he's doing that while holding this big gaudy watch. Like, can I get out of here now? Or no, he's got the glass plaque. Couture has the watch. So Forrest wins. He's awarded everything. When he's handed the watch, he tells Dana, "I could pawn this for a lot," keeping up with the Forrest Griffin act. And then the moment happens where Dana White proclaims that the Fertittas agree that there is no loser, and they're going to offer Stephan Bonnar a 6-figure contract with the UFC as well. He and Forrest embrace. They raise each other's arms. Joe, a sport that is as dumb as it is, and like classy is not a word to associate with it. The current presentation of the UFC is downright gross, I think is the word you and I have used to describe it. This has to be like one of the good moments. Like, this is just in a vacuum. This is happiness.
Certainly is. I always will remember Buffer's response to the double contract thing. It always makes me laugh. No, it is very moving. It's moving in a vacuum, and, I think it now has even a different kind of weight and power. It's also, like, watching this, I've seen, this fight a bunch before, but I haven't watched it in full for a really long time because you just see clips of it so often. And I think doing it this way and being reminded of the way these two came across during the show, it is a really satisfying conclusion from a, theatrical point of view, right? It is. They couldn't have scripted something better, really. Two guys that were, actually fun and quirky and, in Forrest's case, especially likable, having a moment where, they both win and the place is so happy for them. It's great, man. It's awesome.
I watched this live. I was a senior in high school, and I had the same reaction I did rewatching it 20 years later of just fuck yeah. Julio, I imagine it was satisfying for you as well that, they both get the contract. And again, this all in a vacuum of what we're watching here. It's just kind of a perfect conclusion for it.
It was. I was conflicted, not even conflicted, but just curious because you're right. It's satisfying, but could it be that it's satisfying because we know that we're watching real life? Like, if you watch this in a movie, wouldn't you call bullshit? What was the most recent one? Grudge Match, right? Like, De Niro, Stallone. The whole idea is you want the winner. That's you want somebody to actually, and I guess you do. They do say that Forrest wins, but then if the movie also somehow contrived to make the other person a winner, you would say, "Oh, come on, that's not how it goes in real life."
If this was a movie, the judge would have handed the cards over, and Coach Couture would have got up and punched one of them out and tore them up, and then they'd have raised Bonnar's hand. But no, I get what you mean. Definitely, I just think it's I think it's sort of a fight cliche, which is why it probably pops us so much. Like the idea of you don't want to see a guy lose this fight. You'll hear that a lot during great fights. So I think this is about as close as you can get to actually making that a reality, which is why I guess it probably works more. But to your point, yes, doing a whole show about getting a contract and then just being like, they both get one.
Well, it works because it's the two of them.
Yeah.
They put in the work in a way, right? To make you want them to both be happy. Honestly, I was satisfied with the fact that just as soon as they announced that Forrest is the winner, Stephan collapses. And the first thing that Forrest does is kneel down and pick him back up.
Yes.
And that was amazing. And again, going back to the Diego-Kenny fight, Diego is not a gracious winner. As soon as he wins, all he does is talk about himself and God and how he was destined for this. And Forrest immediately cares for his opponent, and there's just that sense of respect and all that. So I think that was the high for me, that they went the distance and then they showed each other respect. And then the contract was kind of like the icing on the cake. Like I said, if I'd seen it in a movie, I would roll my eyes. Like, don't be afraid of being a little harsher with your ending. But because it really happened, I was like, oh, well, I guess it is Dana White's hero moment. I guess the entire show had been building up to this too. He's been such an asshole, and yet here he does something that is, at least on the surface, very just purely generous. I know that he was looking at the dollar sign because I want Stephen to fight for me too. Stephen.
He should have looked. Bruce. He should have looked at both of them, Forrest and Stephan. Dana, this isn't gone. You do want to be a fucking fighter.
That would be incredible. Do you think this is the way they emphasize the contract? Do you think that's why they don't mention it all with the other guys fighting on the prelims? I mean, obviously it's great he gives Stephan the 6-figure contract, but like, how many guys leave the show with contracts, dude? Like, there's quite a few, right? By the end of it. So.
Yeah.
I was wondering that.
Not Josh Rafferty. I know that much.
No, unless he's on.
We get a classic Forrest post-fight interview here where he's talking about how his body just wasn't working the way he wanted it to because he was so tired. And he was talking about, I tried to knee him. It just wouldn't go up. And Steve, you know, being a veteran of the ring as you are, I'm sure you've been blown up from time to time, so you can relate to the level of exhaustion Forrest is here.
Yeah, my last match, if we'd got another 2 minutes, I would have thrown up in front of God and everybody. It would have been horrible. But yeah, I always thought that was bullshit when people would say that until I tried to do P90X for the first time. And I tried to do like a box jump, and yeah, just nothing happened. The balls of my feet did not leave the ground. So yeah, this is a very real phenomenon. In these post fights, I love this. One of the most relatable things with Stephan coming back to his everyman thing was he was happy to have 6 figures, but he really wanted that $15,000 Toyota Scion.
And it doesn't he say now Forrest and I are going to walk around like 2 ugly sons of bitches? I thought that was good line.
Phenomenal.
I don't know why I remember this, but it's cut from the ESPN Plus broadcast of Joe Rogan thanking Spike TV for having the balls to put this on television. Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of things Joe Rogan has said have not been cut since then.
Did they shorten his interview with Kevin James?
That seemed so spontaneous. Like they just were like, "Hey, Kevin James, do you want to be on TV?" And you know, because him and I assume Joe were like friends from comedy days and whatnot. 05 was King of Queens still on television, Steve?
Yes, it ran through like 08.
My God, but yeah, they did not seem prepared at all for that. Kevin James is just like, yeah, it's a good fight. I like it.
He goes with the crowd. He goes, this is the best thing I've ever seen. The best fight I've ever seen. I was like, all right, if Kevin James says it, then I guess maybe I have to take it seriously.
He said, somebody should make a movie about this.
Finally an expert on the scene.
Alex, I don't remember who says it, but the word bolos comes back because I remember you making fun of Levin, saying that Levin was trying to make that a thing and it didn't catch on. But then here, either Forrest or either Forrest or Stephan says it multiple times when they're recounting the fight.
Well, it's Levin's fetch. You know, he made it happen finally. I mean, this was the centerpiece of this, but we do have our main event to discuss here. As we mentioned earlier, Ken Shamrock, despite what we just saw, was the draw of this show. We get the video package building up to that. Rich Franklin has an awesome kind of prick line in it where Ken Shamrock was known for his leg locks and heel hooks. And Rich Franklin says, if Ken wants to go for a leg lock on me, I invite him to do so. I was like, hell yeah, talk that shit, Ace. His nickname would become Ace, Julio, because of his striking resemblance to Jim Carrey. Comes out, Steve, could we be more in the mid-2000s than this gentleman wearing one of his sponsor t-shirts that's a parody of the American Pie logo?
God, it's just a phenomenal piece of 2005 business right there.
Joe, help me fill in the blanks here. Franklin wasn't a full-time Militich guy, was he? Because I always think of like Jeremy Horn, Matt Hughes, Tim Sylvia, but I think he was training some with them at the time.
Yeah, I don't know, because I had the same... I think a lot of things when I think of the Militich team nowadays, but I didn't think of him as like being one of their guys at all for whatever reason in my memory. I don't know. Who was his main camp like later on? Do you remember?
I know George Gurgel was like his head coach there for a while.
Right. Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
In Cincinnati. As we mentioned, Ken Shamrock looking resplendent in his boxing robe, looking like a superhero. It's weird, talk about watching in hindsight, the fact that Rich Franklin is such a nobody here, like who, minor spoiler alert, would go on to be for a moment one of the top stars in the company. Yeah. And this plays no small part in that. Julio, just visually speaking, as these men square off, Ken Shamrock's face looks like an old catcher's mitt. He'd clearly been through some wars here, but for you watching, he has like the aura around him. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Here's the thing. I couldn't help but notice that by the time that Forrest Stephan was over, there were only 20 minutes left on the. So I was like, this is going to end quickly. And I guess it could have gone either way, because I was like, either this guy, the older guy, is going to live up to the hype and just be this legend that knocks out the new kid right away. Or, as they've been hinting, he's going to realize that he's too old to take on the new kid. But I knew that we're not in for another epic fight like the one that had just ended. So I'm not gonna lie to you, coupled with the fact that I didn't know these guys from anything other than what you guys had said in previous recordings, my enthusiasm level was a little lower than the previous show. So I saw him and I was like, all right, let's see what happens. But I wasn't as straw with awe as you seem to have been every time that they showed him in his robe. So I was just like, this is the old guy. All right, let's see what happens.
I think commentary didn't help Ken in that. Even as he was making his entrance, my note was, did you know that Ken Shamrock is 41? Because they're really making sure you know this as he's approaching the cage for a fighting scenario.
Buffer does give him an epic intro, just the way, the world's most dangerous man. I was like, hell yeah. Which he is a far cry from that moniker at this point. In fact, it could be argued that he's not even the most dangerous man in that cage, as is proven in about 30 seconds after the fight starts. Joe, Ken looks obviously in better shape than I will ever be in my life here. He looks old, though, the way he moves here. Yep. He does do a pretty slick drop down in going for a heel hook, but the bloom was off the rose.
Yeah, I always remember that, because this is a very strange fight, and for whatever reason, I'm aware no one else remembers this as like an Ultimate Fight finale memory because of they just remember Forrest and Bonnar. But like, it's a strange fight, and it's a very short fight in which Ken gets himself in trouble exclusively via slipping on 2 occasions. The first of which, where he does on the takedown, is like a one-of-one thing I've never seen happen before. The way that he lands on that, where he shoots, never ever seen that again. And then, of course, the eventual, it happens to him twice. He looks old. To say he's the slower man in there would be a severe understatement. Like, Rich Franklin would have quick hands at 185, let alone fighting a 41-year-old. He is 41, Steve. I don't know if you knew. Ken Shamrock here at 205. It's a nightmare matchup that's like, it's very apparent early on where this is trending, I think. But it's a quirky fight. The way it ends, it's just strange,
Steve, so Ken goes for a head kick and slips, and before he can really register what's going on, Rich Franklin is just fucking dribbling his head like a basketball.
Yeah, that was just my note. It was my only note for the fight. Once we got past the introductions, Rich wins via ground and pound.
Yeah, it's a tough night at the office for Ken Shamrock, but to your point of respect, Julio, Rich Franklin picks him up. He says, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah. And this kind of, from this point forward, Rich Franklin becomes the hopes and dreams of Cincinnati, Ohio, as this was the same year that Carson Palmer would blow out his ACL in the first play of the wild card game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, breaking my heart. But, we still had Rich Franklin to look forward to. And Ken even he's like a fucking high school basketball coach here, because he's talking about the character of Rich Franklin. He's like, I want to see more guys like this.
I will say Ken's post-fight hits different when you realize that all of the shenanigans ahead of Ken inside the cage. Like, he legitimately frames it as he's never going to fight again. And, well, that's what happens in the game.
Yeah, they spent 2 hours hyping up the Ken Shamrock today is as good as he ever was. And then as soon as he drops the fall, Joe's like, Ken Shamrock, you should probably not do this anymore.
Well, that concludes the Ultimate Fighter Season 1 finale. To say it was a success would be a dramatic understatement. The ratings, when they came in, they averaged around 2 million viewers, which would have been probably a bigger audience than they could have imagined. But Joe, there is the urban legend perpetuated by none other than Dana White and some of the MMA media at the time of the during the Bonnar Griffin fight, it peaked at 10 million viewers. And, I don't know if I've ever found anything that confirms that. We need to get our buddy Dave Meltzer on the case. But I kind of always have liked that. I do think it's a bit outlandish, but it's a kind of a fun part of the lore of the story of this fight.
Yeah, and Dana always gets really excited talking about people were calling their friends. And I always just, for whatever reason, that is always like such a joy to think of, There's these two fellas whacking each other on Spike TV. You want to check it out. Like, I mean, the number definitely went up considerably. Yeah, I think, there's some Dana tax involved on that particular number he gives, but it definitely went up a lot, and it became like an event for that 15, 20 minutes, on TV that night. It's wild.
Yeah, they were sending each other 10-cent text messages in 2005. So you got to turn the TV to Spike.
Playing Snake on the phone.
Oh, a question before you sign off. Because I know, Alex, you went into it rooting for Stephan. Joe has made it clear that he was also Team Stephan, even if you didn't go into it. You were Team Couture. That's really who you were rooting for.
Exactly.
Stephan, do you remember who you were? Did you have a preference when the fight first happened?
Yeah, I wanted Forrest to win to the point where I was kind of freaking out in round 2 and Stephan was clearly whipping his ass. I thought for sure either it would be stopped for the cut, and I got especially nervous when they did stop the action to assess the cut. But my boy hung in there strong. I scored round 1 for Forrest, round 2 for Stephan, and round 3 very, very close for Forrest, but I could have called that one either way. But yeah, I definitely was happy with the winner that night.
All right. So we're split 2-2. Coach Couture's biggest fan seems so disappointed.
Don't leave it in the hands of the judges.
Yes.
The good news is there were no losers on this night. We all won,
Except for Kenny.
Yeah. Kenny Florian of BattleBots fame had a rough night at the office. He's backstage, his face is all fucked up, and Diego's probably like celebrating in the next like tent over from him, and he's watching Stephan get a contract. He's like, you got to be fucking kidding me, man. So we now know who the middleweight and light heavyweight ultimate fighters are, but there's one last piece of business we need to tend to. We got a coach's fight to cover. Thank you for listening to this episode of TUFtwenty. A reminder to subscribe to the podcast, visit wearethecontrarians.com, and follow the Contrarians across social media at Contrarian Prime.
You can also follow Alex individually at Contrarian Alex, and you can check out our other special projects on our Patreon channel at patreon.com/Contrarian Prime. If you want to listen to Alex teach me about The Rock and John Cena, that's where you need to go.
You can catch me weekly on the Late Night Grin, live and free on YouTube every Friday night. In addition, Alex and I collaborate monthly on Grin Grappler, discussing some of pro wrestling's biggest and baddest. If those grins are for you, check out LNG Gold, our YouTube membership plan that includes over 50 hours of exclusive content each month.
You can follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at NotDrDeath. That's NotDrDeath. Or you can block me now and save us both a lot of embarrassment.
Until next time, be sure to make your coaches proud and don't call anyone a fatherless bastard.